Welcome to Paradigms at paradigms.life, the radio show and podcast that brings you inspiring people with visions of a viable future for life on Earth that includes humans. Hi, I'm Baruch. Welcome to the show. I have a wonderful guest on this episode. He's a jazz pianist and composer. He's just released a new record inspired by his own life experiences, some of which have been really intense and challenging. I think you'll find him easy to relate to, and the music is really interesting. All right, let's meet him now on this episode of Paradigms. Andy Milne, welcome to Paradigms.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I've been listening to your brand new record, Time Will Tell, and I want to ask you a bunch of things about it. But before we do that, I want to know a little bit of your story. How did you become a musician? Tell me a little bit of your story, like how you grew up and how music became part of your world.
I grew up in a large family, and I was the second youngest, and everybody had taken piano lessons, and I just followed suit. And I guess I was curious about music. Just, I don't know, I can't answer why, but so it wasn't as much of a push from my mother to get me to practice that, like my older siblings. Like I generally wanted to practice, and so that was easier for her. You know, I was just chatting with one of my older sisters yesterday, and she was saying how our mother was sort of almost feeling like, when she got to me, she felt like, oh, I wasted my time with all these other ones, you know, like kind of get them to be serious about music. But I said, no, not necessarily, because I think, you know, music is a really enriching kind of cerebral development thing to have as a young person, and it sculpts you as a cultural, societal being, you know. So I got into it, and then I was studying classical piano, but then when I was quite young still, my brother-in-law turned me on to some jazz recordings. And he wasn't like he was this huge jazz fan. He was just a inquisitive guy who was, you know, liking lots of different kinds of music, but thought I would be interested in jazz. And so he sort of gave me a few things to kind of plant seeds. And then that sort of led me to other people, as most musicians then generally do. You have this one gateway thing that leads to another. And so as a pianist, growing up in Canada, learning about Oscar Peterson, that was kind of like, okay, well, this is something I'm curious about. And so jazz became much more of an obsession to want to understand how to find a place for myself in this music. And so I continued with it and ended up studying with Oscar and continued to develop. You know, eventually you sort of branch into different parts of the tree, depending on, I think, you know, what period of time you come up in, obviously, but also just in terms of who captures your, you know, curiosity. And so when I was coming out of college, after studying with Oscar, then I met Steve Coleman, who I studied with, and then went on to play in his groups for a decade or so. And so those become very formative parts of my, you know, musical upbringing and sort of musical worldview.
Those are two illustrious mentors.
Sure. Yeah. It's hard to live up to.
Yeah. And a wonderful lineage to be part of.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's so interesting about jazz, you know, because like if it speaks to you, it does. I know people who just don't get it at all. I know people who just live for jazz. My oldest brother literally lived for jazz, and that was his whole life. And it's so interesting to me how different music sort of accesses the brain in different ways, you know, and jazz goes to a very certain kind of place, especially, okay, the music on this record, Time Will Tell. And you've talked about this in other interviews, what you did around tonality and the unexpectedness of some of the juxtapositions of melody.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting. It's very intriguing. And in listening to it, it's very unexpected. You know, often in music, we're used to certain changes, and so we can kind of tell where the music's going. Not so with this. So I'm interested in that, both as a conceptual thing, how intentional is it, and the process of developing that. Like, where do you go with that? What is going on in your brain?
Yeah, you're tapping into some fairly, I don't know, primal aspects to my music making in a way, because after you know, I think you're in it for a long time studying, you know, as a young person, developing and learning what people have suggested as good practice and good, you know, areas of understanding. And then you start to maybe lose sight of where something came from because it's just part of your greater aesthetic perspective on how you hear. And I think, any person that's sort of been significant in the music comes along and changes the way we hear, like wholesale for the whole sort of generation, the whole like listening public and everything. It's like as music evolves, we change the way we hear music, right? And that's pretty profound when you look in big swaths of time historically from any particular decade to another particular decade. You're like, wow, this is now part of the landscape. And so individually, for individual artists, that's happening, all the time, where it's a sort of part of your landscape. And so, like, if I'm listening to music, I'm hearing it differently than I did when I was 7. And yet there's something that's probably core to my DNA that I can't possibly fully understand. But when I'm writing now, it's like my reactions to things, I don't know exactly where they all come from, because it could be coming from my time with Steve Coleman. It could be coming from listening to Wayne Shorter. It could be coming from thinking about, Mahler's orchestration. It could become, coming from an understanding of, West African, drum music. It's sort of like, it depends on, like, if I choose to sort of isolate these various inspirational snapshots and go, oh, that's where I'm working right now. Other times it's just this big library of sort of resources that are filtered through me. And then that's not even taking into account my own circumstances and my own emotional state of being, or the time of day, or what I ate, or, so like what's kind of getting channeled is very difficult to really pinpoint. And so, like, on this album, you're talking about the melodic structure or the harmonic structure of things. So many things are guiding me. And then at the end of the day, it's like, okay, but how am I feeling right now? I might have an idea for a piece of music, and then it's like knowing what the next thing is not always by design, it's by listening. And so that's sometimes a very almost mercurial, just hard to kind of grasp aspect of the process. And over time, I think I've developed a patience with allowing these impulses to sort of get a shot, and everybody comes up and gives a pitch, and like this chord presents itself, and you're like, are you what do you have to offer? And so I'm sitting there as this arbiter kind of deciding, no, I think your time will come another day, and we'll see you maybe tomorrow. But thanks for stopping by. I'm going to put you on the side table here because I might need you. So don't go away. Don't get back in your car, but there's somebody in the queue that I'm like, you're the person I'm looking for. And so I'm like this, casting director or something like this.
I'm talking with Andy Milne about his new album, Time Will Tell. Let's hear something from it now. This is Purity of Heart. You're listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life. From his new album, Time Will Tell, that's Andy Milne with Purity of Heart. We're going to get back to my conversation with Andy now and learn some more about this music and his life. So one of the things that I think is true after talking with, I don't know how many thousands of artists at this point is, everyone's telling their story, right? In their own way, through their own tools. We all have, whether we're an artist or a plumber, we have our tools and we're doing our thing.
Yes.
And how we do what we do tells a bit of our personal story, whether we're aware of it or not. Right. So
Yeah.
I'm interested, and you have talked about some about this record, but I'm interested in what parts of your personal story you're conscious of telling in this music. And then I'm curious about, after you did it and you listened to it, what did you hear that you might not have realized you put into it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because after I've done it, that I don't listen to it much. Because you've been so consumed and immersed in it for months and sometimes years, depending on what goes on, But so once it's done, you're like, I don't think about it that much. But I guess I would say that when I'm in it, like there's a bit of a reflection of what you're hoping to bring into the music. And so that's usually based upon if you have a goal or you have an artistic mission or you have a larger kind of conceptual objective, then that's, you're trying to channel that in any given composition, or if it's a larger body of work, let's say, or a larger extended piece of music. But I think then there's the more ephemeral reflection of what you are less control of, in terms of what your daily existence is, how you're able to gain insight into what the music is presenting to you. And then, in terms of channeling your life specifically, it's like, there's a kind of for me, a need to have a honest reflection. I don't want to present, like, there's, in a large way, it's like, you create an album of music. It is abstract. It is manufactured. It is artificial in a way. No one's listening to you in your brain. No one's listening to you in your studio making the music. I mean, they can come see you in a club, but largely when people experience the music, they're not experiencing it as it's being created or with the same brainwaves that are being floated around through the various musicians. And so that's the thing is an abstraction. Like, I mean, I've done a lot of film and television work, and and also been on set and sort of like, kind of thinking, okay, look, the enormous amount of manufacturing of reality that exists to present a television show, let's say, or it's kind of baffling for the average person that doesn't do it, because we believe it, even though we see it on a screen and we understand that that's presented to us. We know we can't reach into the TV or the computer and actually, shake hands with the characters, but we have a suspended reality that we're able to kind of go, I know this is what this is, but I'm in it. All that goes into it is so unbelievably, calculated. And so, like, music does have that. I mean, even if you think of just a concert, like all the things that go into like presenting an artist on a stage, somebody had to sort of take care of all these different pieces of the pie. And so, that's a truth that we have to sort of, accept. It doesn't mean that it's not authentic, but it does mean that when you are kind of, as an artist, assessing what's authentic for you, is almost a deficit, because all that other stuff is there that's kind of artificial. It's not truly just coming from your brain, and your heart. And so, like, you have to, for me, it's like, then there needs to be that truth that is your contribution to it, because all that other stuff is sort of, artificially, tampered with.
So that makes me think most likely you prefer performing live.
Well, I love performing live, but I love performing in the studio too. There's a track on the album called Solotude. Part of its compositional curiosity and allure to me as a composer and a performer wasn't just playing it, and it was the playing it and affecting it artificially in the studio environment, which I probably would never do live. I mean, I could, but it's just sort of more stuff to plug in.
Right.
And that's fun sometimes to do that, but I probably would never be able to play that live. And so it is a very fun thing to be able to explore with these other controls on the experiment. Playing live, you have that audience relationship, which you can't get in the studio necessarily.
Right. No, one isn't better than the other. They're just really different experiences.
They're really different experiences. And I mean, obviously, one is better from the point of view of an immediate feedback loop. If I'm in a venue with an audience, there's an immediate feedback loop. If I'm performing on a recording that then we wonder if people hear it, I may get an email, I may get a like, you may get a post here, maybe get a review. You don't know what that effect is, and you just have to kind of go on faith. Somebody could come up to me 20 years later and say, that record changed my life. It happened to me actually just a few weeks ago in Germany. Guy came up to me and said, the record you made in 1999 changed my life. It was my gateway into this music. I wouldn't have known that if he hadn't said hello. I just happened to be in the same place as him so that he could come up to me.
How fun. That's really cool.
It's great. Yeah. Because it's like, it's, for me, it's my second record. It's a very early part of my journey. We took a picture together and everything. It was like, he was very appreciative, and it was very real. And it was ironic because there was a young woman talking to me at the time who is a musician and sort of challenged with her own kind of journey in terms of what she felt should be happening in her career. And so she was kind of witnessing this whole thing. And after this guy left, she said, oh, wow, I really needed to see that. And I said, I'm glad you saw that. I said, because that record that he's talking about, I mean, I don't think he actually mentioned the date. And I said, that record he was talking about, I recorded it 25 years ago.
We'll return to my conversation with Andy Milne, talking about his new album, Time Will Tell, and talking about the things in his life that inspired this music. But let's hear another track. This is called Lost and Found. Andy Milne. His new album is Time Will Tell. We just heard Lost and Found. And now here's the next part of my conversation with Andy Milne. This record, Time Will Tell. Talk to me about the pieces, any particular pieces you want to talk about, the story that you're telling with this. I know there's some personal story in there.
Yeah. I mean, the album really, it sort of, its life came in a period of my life where I was grappling with some really deep existential aspects of my identity because I was adopted as a child, as an infant, and over the course of the last 4 years now, have developed relationships with members of my birth family. When I made this record, and as I was writing the music for it, that whole period was the period in which I was getting to know my birth mother, and then subsequently meeting her like probably 3 weeks before, or maybe, sorry, yeah, I met her, I guess maybe a month and a half before I actually recorded the album, but like some of the music I wrote the days after I first laid eyes on her and spent time with her. And so I'm sitting at home in my studio here and really kind of thinking, okay, is this what this album is? I guess this is what this album is. I couldn't escape it. It was too big.
Yeah.
But I don't write from a place that I'm going to sort of like, I wasn't writing an opera where I'm telling the story in this very linear way, but it was pretty impossible for me to ignore this
Yeah. How would you
master.
separate that?
I couldn't, yeah, and so it was just in the air because I'm sitting, and my wife was actually away at the time, so I wasn't really able to just talk to her about it, because it was a pretty heavy weight, and so I didn't have words anyway. Even if I could talk to her, I didn't have any words. So it was like music was the language that I knew I could utilize to kind of talk about a feeling, talk about a journey. It's like I mentioned earlier, I've written a lot for film and television, and so like in those experiences, I'm writing not to use words to talk to an audience like the script writer, but like, literally to sort of say, here's a feeling, let's accentuate that. Here's an action, let's accentuate that. Here's an emotional platform to tinker with in terms of the viewer or listener's experience. So those types of relationships with music, I'm getting more and more familiar with as I do more of that kind of work. And I think for my own work, it sort of bleeds into almost becoming like, okay, well, this is a little bit of this movie, this Andy Milne biopic, if you will, that has this soundtrack, and these are particular moments that are really related to a very specific period of my life, of course, but
Yeah.
they might hold value 25 years from now, just like that other record did. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you have a piece called Lost and Found that probably speaks pretty directly to what you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that piece, Apart is another piece that definitely speaks to that. Purity of Heart is another piece that really speaks to that. And No Matter What is probably a piece that, for me, speaks to sort of like, because you're filtering you can't totally shut your brain down and just say, I'm writing music now. Like it's just still there. I mean, at least for me, this was too big. I couldn't,
Yeah.
I couldn't put it on in a folder and put it away.
Well, and honestly, it's so juicy. Why would you want to?
Well, but it was hard because it just I didn't have words, and so it wasn't like, well, what folder do I even put it in if I want to? Too far reaching.
And if you don't want to go there, you don't have to. But I just want to ask you. It's been some time you wrote the music. Maybe you do have words. What was it like to meet your birth mother?
Oh, it was surreal. I mean, it was really joyous and really. I think if I'd been a younger person, that if this had happened to me at a different time in my life, I would have not quite had the same level of balance in my being in this and in my just placement in the world, where I would maybe have struggled with some of the challenges and the exchanges that I didn't have to struggle with because I was, in just a fairly balanced place in my life where it was I could handle it. And that's, I think the words are the titles. It's as much as I go into words, the titles sort of, they kind of summarize, and the title of the album is the big summary of all for me in some ways, because there's the part of this story is that the connection I got to my birth mother was through a cousin, birth cousin, who I met on Ancestry and became very close to. We discovered later that we shared a mutual friend. Neither of us are actually close to this person anymore, but we were in our 20s, and he was close to him even before then. We would have probably been at the same Christmas parties many times, but to be this one person apart for those many years. It's like we could have met at any point, since I was, I don't know, 19 and didn't. And of course, if as I'm saying, if I had met my, this cousin and then subsequently birth mother, or gotten kind of tangled up into those family dynamics, it would have been a much different threat, line for me and for him and for her and a lot of other people than it was at this juncture for all of us. And so, the patience of just kind of going, oh, okay, well, it's not now, but maybe. And I'd put it out of my mind, but this happening when it did was just a little bit like an artistic journey, which, even if I didn't have this to go through, it's like when you're working as an artist, developing your aesthetic and developing your clarity of what it means to express yourself with your given tools, you don't quite know when it's going to sort of cook.
We'll be back with the next part of my conversation with Andy Milne after we hear another track from his new album, Time Will Tell. Hope you're enjoying the music. And as you're hearing more of Andy's story, you can feel where that story is in the music. Okay, this one's called Beyond the Porcelain Door. You're listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life. Beyond the Porcelain Door, Andy Milne from his new album Time Will Tell. And now let's get back to my conversation with Andy. Well, there's waiting for inspiration, just
Yeah.
like waiting for Godot. And then there's, seeking inspiration. And then there's trusting inspiration.
And then there's just grunt work too.
Yeah, then there's the
Which
grunt
is
work.
you just got to do it. And
Yep.
you can't get caught up whether you're inspired. I mean, inspiration is not under your control. I think you can look and acknowledge where something may inspire you, and you might not have the tools to take that inspiration and make it into your art. And there's sort of like the conundrum. It's like, okay, there's plenty around to inspire, but do you have the tools to turn it into something?
Right. Well, the words muse and music.
There might be a relationship, yeah.
There might be. I want to ask you about the trio. I'm just interested in the friendship and what it's like to play with these guys.
Well, yeah, I mean, like John Hebert and I played together in his band about 14 years ago, starting, and I think we played a little bit together before that. Clarence and I had never played together before I formed this group, but I'd known him and dug his playing with lots of people, and so there was kind of that was those different pieces that I was putting together, and kind of going on faith that this couldn't not be amazing. Maybe I was hoping that would be the outcome, but our first gig was like, I didn't have any music that I'd written for the band per se, but I had just like wanted to see what we would do and to see if my hunch was remotely accurate, and it was. So it was like, okay, no question, I want to keep going, because I felt like we had the common ground that we share. It's certainly something that I really appreciate about the two of them, because we all three of us have a real fine appreciation for sound and texture, and so I want to write music that kind of creates space to sort of really play with that. And you don't really have to compose it for them, because they have such an acute awareness of what their contribution in sound is. I mean, that just is one example. And so I don't need to compose. I don't need to write those kinds of things, because they have such strong abilities, especially Clarence, actually, in some ways, because comparing them, when I think of comparing him to a lot of other drummers that are great drummers and play like wonderful music, but like not everybody really gets sound that way. And Johnny Bear is the same way, and he's an audiophile, so he has this kind of acute sense of like thinking about like just sound and space and the color of sound and the texture of what he can play on the bass. So and I've always been sort of like in that way with the piano, and getting into projects with prepared piano and just thinking about the decay of something and the attack of something. And so as much as we love rhythm and melody and harmony, sound is like this huge other force that I really appreciate being able to play with these two guys with, to sort of find that magical part of the way these instruments, you could of course try to write it, and people do, but it's like it's fresh when we do it every single time. It's different.
You are playing prepared piano on this record in some places.
A little bit, not tons, but some. Yeah.
I noticed a couple of little places where I thought, well, that's an unusual sound for this trio.
Yeah.
Okay, so very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, Beyond the Porcelain Door is a piece that there's a lot of prepared piano.
So taking it on the road?
Yeah, we've got week or so, week and a half worth of dates coming up in May. Going to be in New York, going to be in New Haven, going to be in Ann Arbor, going to be in Pittsburgh, going to be in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and LA. And then we'll be in Rochester next month.
Oh, wow. All over.
Jazz festival, yeah.
That's awesome. So lots of people in different places get to hear this music live. That's very cool.
Yeah. And hopefully, I was just at Jazz Ahead in Europe showcasing with the trio. And so I'm hoping that yields a lot of more European opportunities. Probably obviously won't happen until the next season, because it's sort of like how booking works, but able to present the music in a way that I think would be attractive to a lot of presenters that are looking for, a trio like this. And so like, it's just one little piece of what I do too, right? Because like this trio is sort of like my main ensemble focus right now, but I'm doing a lot of writing in a different context. So I have I have a chamber music piece, a piano quintet for a really fabulous young string quartet called the Isidore String Quartet that we're premiering in August. So I have this piece that I'm looking forward to performing and seeing what life that it has with the quartet. And I just finished a bunch of arrangements for a John Coltrane orchestral legacy project that's happening. And so the premiere for that is in 2 weeks in Toronto with Joe Lovano and the Toronto Symphony. So I'm looking forward to hearing that, even though I'm not playing on it. And then I have a film score to work on later this summer as well.
Wow. And you teach.
And I teach, but the summer I've got sort of more or less off from the teaching. But yeah, during the academic year, I'm teaching at University of Michigan. So that's its own kind of it's its own project in a way, you know.
We'll be back with the final part of my conversation with Andy Milne after we hear this one from his new album, Time Will Tell. It's called No Matter What. That's No Matter What from Time Will Tell, the new album from Andy Milne. And now here's the final part of my conversation with Andy. You know, my feeling about music is it's always a journey, and there's always some aspect of discovery involved, you know. I mean, there's the music that we're used to, that we listen to over and over, that's our comfort music, you know, blah, blah, blah. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when I encounter something new like this. It's like, oh, I'm going someplace I haven't been before. And that's an adventure. And I like it. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks for checking it out and for your interest in it and for being able to share it with your listeners too. I mean, I think that journey though, it's like you had alluded to it earlier when you said about like, okay, when I listen back after I've made a recording, there's that too, just for the listener, even if they weren't part of the making of it. There's that, you know, I went back to this record that I was digging of in 2024 and 10 years from now kind of thing and going, yeah, it's like something happened in my life where something spoke to me in a different way, you know. That I'm just sort of paraphrasing what a listener might, you know, share.
And also, oh, I heard the artist talk about it, and now it means something new to me when I listen to it. I like that part.
You know, I mean, I did an interview a couple of days ago, and they were asking me like, "I said, what do you hope people come away with?" You know, and you know, sometimes there's just even the stories that have inspired me to make the music, or the experiences that have inspired me to make the music. Hopefully, my journey through those things can be inspiring in some way. I mean, my previous record was largely about my sort of artistic reaction and personal reaction to having a cancer diagnosis and coming through on the other side of it. I know when that record came out and I was doing interviews like this and met with someone who actually the interviewer was a cancer survivor, and it was like a very emotional interview, you know. And so, you know, we touch people in these different kinds of ways that sometimes you don't necessarily have that intent. Like it's like maybe I don't set out to say I want to give somebody the courage to keep going, but you know I'm not going to shy away from it because there's somebody out there that's probably had a similar circumstance of wanting to connect with a blood relative in some capacity or what have you. Whether there's so many different dynamics that exist for people, and you have to be able to want to have the fortitude sometimes. And sometimes when you see that people have gone through something similar or something worse, or not as worse, but you know, similar, you kind of get, you know, you get some ammunition for that.
We use the term the human condition usually to describe the things that are hard or that we wish were different. But part of the human condition is that we have this ability literally to share our experiences with each other in ways that sort of make us all be more.
Yeah.
And that is one of the really beautiful things about humanity is we are capable of communication and of being changed by it.
Yeah.
It's so obvious, it's easy to overlook it, but it's actually a very powerful thing.
Yeah. And it's you know, what's worrisome now is that we're so enamored with AI that it's just like you kind of go, you know, but there's, I mean, as flawed as we are, there's some stuff that we do that's really kind of inspirational. And like, why do you want to get rid of that? Like, I mean, like, I guess if we can get rid of the flaws, well, probably wouldn't be as interesting.
It's not real. I mean, literally, it's artificial. My response is always, I like real intelligence.
Yeah.
As opposed to artificial intelligence. It's very interesting, and we are, you know, like crows, we like shiny new things, but I think this discernment is important.
But it's a slippery slope that we're on, and I don't know. We've been gradually working this way it's not like it's like, oh, just the iPhone. It's been going, it's not Siri, it's not Alexa. I mean, these things, yes, we've normalized them in the last decade, right? But we've been normalizing things, you know, for a long time in terms of, you know, whether you think of it fire or you think of the wheel or you think of, there's all these little micro advancements. But I think we're moving into this space where we're seeing the sort of like the, you know, the potential in sort of, you know, different kinds of human things that you're talking about that are not necessarily purely physical. They're spiritual and in nature, in terms of art is spiritual in nature, communication is spiritual in nature. And so we're talking about like replacing that, or sort of being enamored with the ways in which we can replace that, which is inherently like kind of like if that's all that's left, we're kind of really just, you know, these movies that have been out there basically for decades, basically apocalyptic kinds of dystopian futures. And not that far off in terms of putting the ideas in our brains.
Oh yeah, no, we're there. You ever read any C.S. Lewis?
Yeah, when I was a kid, yeah.
Well, there's a trilogy of books he wrote that is considered his science fiction trilogy, but it's not. It's theology.
Yeah.
And there's one point in there where he's describing humans falling in love with artifice. And he describes it, and I'm going to paraphrase because otherwise I know I'll get it a little wrong, that they make images of each other to lie with rather than lying with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that we're there.
Yeah.
And it's what an interesting thing. Like, go out and get dirty.
Yeah.
That's real.
Yeah. Real dirt.
Andy, it's great to talk with you. I love what you're doing, and I really appreciate where you're coming from and that you're sharing it with the world. And thank you for that.
Thanks for the opportunity to chat. I really appreciate it. It was a fun conversation.
Andy Milne, thanks for talking with me, for being on Paradigms. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm enjoying Time Will Tell, the music, very much. Andy is an example of a human being, a human story, illness, adoption. One of the great things about humans is how resilient we can be. We can take immense challenge and turn it into inspiration and even into art. Right now in the world, a lot of people are facing immense challenges to their very survival. And some of them will survive and some of them won't. And part of how people can heal from trauma is by finding inspiration in it, as Andy did, to make music or to make art or to talk about it with others so that they can benefit from it. Injustice and cruelty do not just happen. They are the result of choices made by people. When a person cuts a plume on a graduation cap or drops a bomb on a house with people in it or shoots up a school or uses a deadly pandemic for political gain, these are choices made by people. These are not random accidental acts. But it's also true that kindness is a choice, honesty is a choice, compassion is a choice, creativity. We have choices. So when we see people doing terrible things in the world, we must understand they're choosing that and they are accountable. And when we see people doing wonderful things in the world, they are choosing that. All right. If you'd like to know more about Andy, check out his website, andymilne.com, andymilne.com. Learn more about his music. Maybe you can go see him live. I hope you'll also check out the Paradigms website, paradigms.life, where all of our episodes are archived. And at the bottom of that page is a link to my new audiobook, The Prophet, by Khalil Gibran, narrated by Starhawk. I hope you'll check that out. All right, we're going to end the show with one more track from Time Will Tell. It's a short little piece that Andy talked about, but it's potent. It's called Solitude. And let's let the word for the week be compassion. Notice it. Practice it. All right. Baruch signing off for this episode of Paradigms. We'll be back next time with more inspiring people. Until then, let's practice compassion and be well.
You've been listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life.